What you're about to hear will shock you to your core. Three lives intertwined in a web of deception so twisted, so calculated, that even seasoned investigators couldn't believe what they uncovered. Two men, one woman, and a conspiracy that ended with someone fighting for their life in a hospital bed. This is the story of Victoria Chen, a woman who appeared to have everything meant a loving husband, two beautiful children, a successful career, and the respect of her entire community. But behind closed doors, Victoria was living a double life so dangerous, so calculated, that it would ultimately destroy everything she touched. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand how love can become obsession, how trust can become a weapon, and how the person sleeping next to you might be planning your destruction. But here's what will really shock you. Mias, the mastermind behind this entire conspiracy, wasn't who anyone expected. Before we dive into this incredible true story, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being here. Your support, your comments, and your engagement with these difficult cases means absolutely everything to me and to this channel. Without you, stories like Victoria's would never be told. I need to warn you that today's case involves mature themes, including infidelity, financial fraud, manipulation, and violence. If you're sensitive to these topics, please consider whether you want to continue listening. I've spent the last 4 months researching this case, speaking with investigators, reviewing court documents, and piecing together a timeline that reveals the shocking truth about what really happened. Some of the details I'm about to share have never been made public before today. Make sure you stay until the very end of this investigation, because I'm going to reveal a twist that even the detectives working this case didn't see coming until it was almost too late. Over the next hour, we're going to uncover 6 shocking chapters in this story. First, we'll meet Victoria and Robert Chen, the couple that everyone in their suburban neighborhood thought was absolutely perfect. Then we'll discover the cracks in their marriage that led Victoria down a path of deception. Next, we'll meet Marcus Williams, the personal trainer who became Victoria's first secret liaison, and we'll learn about the dangerous game they began playing together. But Marcus wasn't the only player in this deadly triangle. We'll then uncover how Detective Amanda Rodriguez stumbled onto this case while investigating something completely different, and how her discovery changed everything. We'll follow the investigation as it revealed a conspiracy much larger and more dangerous than simple adultery. Finally, we'll witness how this web of lies exploded into violence, leaving one person fighting for their life and 2 others facing decades in prison. But here's what I want you to think about as we go through this story. One of these 3 people was the real mastermind, manipulating the others like pieces in a chess game. Can you figure out who it was before I reveal the truth? Victoria Chen was 34 years old when this story begins, and by all appearances, she was living the American dream. She had built a successful real estate business in the affluent suburb of Westfield Heights, specializing in luxury homes for wealthy families moving into the area. Her Instagram account was filled with photos of beautiful houses, happy clients, and awards from her real estate company. But it was her personal life that really made Victoria the envy of her community. She had been married to Robert Chen for 9 years, and their relationship seemed absolutely perfect. Robert was 37, a successful architect who had designed some of the most beautiful homes in their neighborhood. Together they had 2 children, 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Michael. Their neighbors still remember how Victoria and Robert would take evening walks through their tree-lined streets, holding hands and laughing together. They hosted neighborhood barbecues, attended every school function for their children, and were active members of their local church. Victoria's best friend, Jennifer, later told police that she had always been jealous of Victoria's marriage, saying that Robert treated Victoria like a queen. But beneath this perfect surface, cracks were beginning to form. It started in the spring of 2023, when Robert first noticed subtle changes in his wife's behavior. Victoria, who had always been open with her phone, suddenly became protective of it. She would take it with her to the bathroom, sleep with it under her pillow, and turn it face down whenever Robert was nearby. Robert also noticed that Victoria's work schedule seemed to be getting more demanding. She was having more evening appointments, more weekend showings, and more last-minute meetings with clients. When Robert offered to help with these evening appointments or asked about her new clients, Victoria would become defensive, saying that real estate was a competitive business and she couldn't afford to turn down opportunities. The changes weren't just behavioral, Mido, they were physical too. Victoria suddenly became interested in fitness, joining an expensive gym across town instead of the community center where she had always worked out. She started buying new clothes, expensive makeup, and even got highlights in her hair for the first time in years. When Robert complimented these changes, Victoria would brush off his comments, saying she was just trying to look more professional for her real estate clients. But what really worried Robert were the financial inconsistencies he was starting to notice. Victoria had always handled their personal finances, but Robert managed their joint business accounts since some of his architectural clients also used Victoria's real estate services. He started noticing unusual expenses, restaurant charges at places they had never been together, hotel charges in nearby cities, when Victoria claimed to be showing houses locally, and cash withdrawals that Victoria couldn't explain. When Robert tried to discuss these concerns with Victoria, she would become angry, accusing him of not trusting her and not supporting her growing business. She would point out that her real estate income had increased significantly over the past few months, and she would ask why he was questioning her success instead of celebrating it. But Robert's suspicions reached a breaking point in late summer 2023, during what should have been a celebration. Victoria had just closed the biggest sale of her career, a $2.5 million mansion to a wealthy executive relocating from New York. The commission from this sale was enormous, and Victoria suggested they celebrate with a weekend getaway. However, when Robert tried to book their hotel room, he discovered that their joint credit card had been maxed out. When he asked Victoria about this, she claimed there had been some temporary business expenses and that everything would be resolved once her commission check cleared. But when Robert discreetly called Victoria's real estate office, he learned something that changed everything. That huge commission Victoria had talked about didn't exist. The sale had fallen through 3 weeks earlier. That night, after Victoria went to sleep, Robert made a decision that would expose a conspiracy far more dangerous than simple infidelity. Robert contacted a private investigation firm called Sterling Security, and he was assigned to work with investigator Patricia Stone. Patricia had 15 years of experience investigating matrimonial cases, and she immediately recognized the warning signs in Robert's story. However, she advised Robert that most infidelity cases reveal exactly what the client expects to find: evidence of an affair. She warned him that he needed to be prepared for that reality. But Patricia also noticed some elements in Victoria's behavior that didn't fit the typical pattern of a simple affair. The financial inconsistencies, the elaborate lies about business success, and the sophisticated level of deception suggested something more complex than just emotional infidelity. Patricia began her surveillance on a Monday morning in September 2023. She followed Victoria from her home to what appeared to be a normal day of real estate work. Victoria visited 2 houses that were legitimately for sale, met with one genuine client at a coffee shop, and spent an hour at her real estate office. But then at 2:30 in the afternoon, Victoria's behavior changed completely. Instead of continuing with real estate appointments, Victoria drove to an upscale shopping mall 20 minutes from her home. She parked near the back of the parking lot and waited. 15 minutes later, a black BMW pulled up next to her car, and a man got out. Patricia watched as Victoria and this unknown man embraced passionately before getting into Victoria's car together. Patricia followed them to a Hotel My 2, not a cheap motel, but a 4-star business hotel that charged over $200 per night. Victoria had clearly done this before, because she walked straight to the front desk, used what appeared to be a fake name, and paid for the room in cash. She and the mystery man disappeared into the hotel for exactly 90 minutes before emerging separately and leaving in different directions. But Patricia's investigation was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, she documented a pattern of behavior that shocked even her experienced perspective. Victoria wasn't just having one affair, she was juggling multiple relationships with different men, and each relationship followed a specific, calculated pattern. The man from the BMW was Marcus Williams, a 29-year-old personal trainer who worked at an exclusive gym in the city. Patricia's background check revealed that Marcus had a history of relationships with wealthy married women. In fact, he had been investigated twice in the past 5 years for suspected financial exploitation of female clients, but no charges had ever been filed. Victoria's relationship with Marcus appeared to be both physical and financial. Patricia's surveillance revealed that Victoria was regularly giving Marcus expensive gifts, a new watch, designer clothes, and cash payments that Marcus would deposit immediately after their meetings. But Marcus was also providing something to Victoria. He was introducing her to other wealthy men who attended his exclusive gym. This is where Victoria's scheme became truly sophisticated. Marcus would identify wealthy married men at his gym, men who seemed unhappy in their marriages or who complained about their wives. He would then introduce these men to Victoria, not as his girlfriend, but as a successful real estate agent who might be able to help them with property investments or even discreet apartment rentals for extramarital activities. Patricia discovered that Victoria had developed inappropriate relationships with at least 3 other married men through Marcus's introductions. But these weren't just affairs. Victoria was systematically extracting financial benefits from each relationship. She would convince these men to invest in fake real estate opportunities, borrow money for fabricated business emergencies, or pay for expensive gifts that she claimed were for her children, but were actually being resold for cash. The most disturbing part of Patricia's investigation was discovering how Victoria compartmentalized these relationships. She had created separate phone numbers, email addresses, and even social media profiles for each affair. She had rented a small apartment across town that she used for meetings when hotels weren't convenient. She had opened multiple bank accounts that Robert didn't know about, where she was depositing money from her various schemes. But Patricia also uncovered something that worried her even more than Victoria's infidelity and fraud: evidence that Victoria and Marcus were planning something involving Robert directly. In text messages recovered from Victoria's secret phone, Patricia found conversations about Robert's architectural business, his wealthy clients, and specific details about the Chen family's financial accounts. One message from Marcus to Victoria was particularly disturbing. "Once we get access to his business accounts, we won't need these small-time marks anymore. But we have to be careful about timing. He can't suspect anything until we're ready to make our move." Victoria's response was even more chilling. "Don't worry about Robert. I know exactly how to handle him. He trusts me completely. And when the time comes, he'll do whatever I ask him to do." Patricia immediately advised Robert that this case had evolved beyond simple matrimonial investigation. She recommended that he contact law enforcement because it appeared that Victoria and Marcus were planning some form of financial fraud that would directly target Robert and his business. But what neither Patricia nor Robert knew was that law enforcement was already aware of Marcus Williams. Detective Amanda Rodriguez had been investigating Marcus for 3 months as part of a larger financial fraud investigation, and Victoria Chen had just appeared on the detective's radar in a way that would change everything. Detective Amanda Rodriguez worked in the Financial Crimes Division of the Metropolitan Police Department, and she had been investigating Marcus Williams since June 2023. The investigation had begun when she received complaints from 3 different women who claimed that Marcus had defrauded them out of significant amounts of money through fake investment opportunities and elaborate romance scams. The first victim was Linda Harrison, a 45-year-old divorced executive who had been taking personal training sessions with Marcus at his gym. Over 6 months, Marcus had convinced Linda to invest $40,000 in what he claimed was a real estate flipping opportunity. When Linda never saw any returns on her investment and couldn't get clear answers from Marcus about the properties, she discovered that the real estate company Marcus had told her about didn't exist. The second victim was Patricia Newman, a 52-year-old widow who had met Marcus through a dating app. Marcus had convinced Patricia that he was in love with her and wanted to start a business together. A high-end fitness consulting firm. Patricia invested $35,000 of her late husband's life insurance money into this fake business. When she tried to visit the business location Marcus had given her, she found an empty office suite that had been vacant for months. The third victim was Rebecca Torres, a 38-year-old married woman who had been having an affair with Marcus for 8 months. Marcus had convinced Rebecca to take out a second mortgage on her family home, claiming he needed the money to pay for his mother's cancer treatment. Rebecca gave Marcus $60,000 before discovering that his mother was alive, healthy, and living in Florida with no history of cancer. Detective Rodriguez had been building a case against Marcus for these 3 fraud incidents when her investigation took an unexpected turn. While reviewing Marcus's financial records, she discovered that he was regularly receiving large cash deposits from someone identified only as V. Chen in his bank statements. Initially, Detective Rodriguez assumed that V. Chen was another victim of Marcus's romance scams. But when she began investigating Victoria Chen, she discovered something that shocked her. Victoria wasn't Marcus's victim. She was his partner. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that Victoria and Marcus had been working together for over a year, running a sophisticated operation that targeted wealthy married men. The scheme worked like this: Marcus would identify potential victims at his exclusive gym, men who were wealthy, unhappily married, and potentially vulnerable to extramarital temptation. He would then introduce these men to Victoria, presenting her as a successful, sophisticated woman who was unhappily married herself. Victoria would begin affairs with these men, but unlike typical extramarital relationships, Victoria's affairs were carefully calculated business operations. She would gradually extract financial benefits from each relationship, sometimes through direct requests for money, sometimes through fake investment opportunities, and sometimes through elaborate stories about family emergencies or business crises. What made Victoria and Marcus's scheme particularly effective was how they used their legitimate businesses as cover. Marcus's personal training business gave him access to wealthy clients and provided a reasonable explanation for why he knew so many affluent people. Victoria's real estate business allowed her to create believable stories about investment opportunities and gave her credibility when discussing financial matters with her victims. Detective Rodriguez discovered that over 18 months, Victoria and Marcus had defrauded at least 7 different men out of a combined total of over $400,000. But what worried the detective most was evidence that Victoria and Marcus were planning to escalate their operation significantly. In surveillance footage from Marcus's gym, Detective Rodriguez observed Victoria meeting with Marcus and pointing out specific men during their workouts. In one recorded conversation, Victoria could be heard saying, "That one there, the architect, he's perfect. He has access to millions in client funds, and he trusts me completely. This could be our biggest score yet." Detective Rodriguez realized that Victoria was talking about her own husband, Robert Chen. Phone records showed that Victoria had been sharing detailed information about Robert's business with Marcus, including client lists, project budgets, and account access information. Text messages between Victoria and Marcus revealed that they were planning to manipulate Robert into giving them access to his business accounts, potentially defrauding his architectural clients out of millions of dollars. But Detective Rodriguez also discovered something else that elevated this case from financial fraud to potential violence. Marcus Williams had a history that was more dangerous than simple romance scams. Court records revealed that Marcus had been arrested twice for domestic violence, once against a former girlfriend who had tried to end their relationship. In both cases, the charges had been dropped when the victims suddenly refused to cooperate with prosecutors. Detective Rodriguez's investigation suggested that Marcus had intimidated both victims into silence, possibly through threats or additional financial manipulation. Most concerning was evidence that Marcus was becoming increasingly frustrated with the timeline of the Robert Chen operation. In recent text messages, Marcus had been pressuring Victoria to move faster, suggesting that they needed to wrap this up before he gets suspicious. When Victoria pushed back, saying that she needed more time to manipulate Robert properly, Marcus's messages became threatening. In one particularly disturbing exchange, Marcus had written to Victoria, "I've been patient with your timeline, but my other sources of income are drying up. We need that architect money now, or I'm going to have to take matters into my own hands. You know I don't like loose ends." Victoria's response showed that she was also becoming frightened of Marcus. "Please don't do anything stupid. I can handle Robert, but I need you to stay calm. If you scare him, we'll lose everything." Detective Rodriguez realized that Robert Chen was in immediate danger, both from financial fraud and potentially from physical violence. But when she tried to locate Robert to warn him, she discovered that he had already hired a private investigator and was planning to confront Victoria about her infidelity. The detective knew that if Robert confronted Victoria before law enforcement could properly investigate and build a case against Marcus, the situation could become extremely dangerous. She immediately began planning a coordinated operation to protect Robert while gathering enough evidence to arrest both Victoria and Marcus. But Detective Rodriguez had no idea that Victoria and Marcus's partnership was about to implode in a way that would put Robert's life in immediate, life-threatening danger. Detective Rodriguez faced a complex tactical situation. She needed to protect Robert Chen from immediate danger while gathering enough evidence to prosecute Victoria and Marcus for their financial crimes. She also needed to do this without alerting Victoria and Marcus that law enforcement was investigating them, because premature exposure could cause them to flee, or worse, accelerate any plans they had to harm Robert. The detective's first step was to contact Patricia Stone, the private investigator Robert had hired. Initially, Patricia was reluctant to share information from her matrimonial investigation, citing client confidentiality. But when Detective Rodriguez explained that Robert's life might be in danger and showed Patricia evidence of Marcus's history of violence, the private investigator agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. Detective Rodriguez learned from Patricia that Robert was planning to confront Victoria about her affair within the next few days. This timeline was extremely dangerous. because surveillance had shown that Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated about the slow progress of their scheme. If Robert confronted Victoria and disrupted their operation, Marcus might react violently. Working with Patricia, Detective Rodriguez developed a plan to approach Robert directly. They would reveal the full scope of Victoria's criminal activities, explain the danger he was in, and ask for his cooperation in gathering evidence against Victoria and Marcus. This was risky because Robert's emotional reaction to learning about his wife's betrayal might compromise the investigation. The meeting took place on a Thursday evening in October 2023 at Patricia Stone's office. When Detective Rodriguez and Patricia explained the full scope of Victoria's activities to Robert, his reaction was initially disbelief, then devastating emotional pain, and finally, anger that surprised even the experienced investigators. Robert told them that he had suspected Victoria was having an affair, but he had never imagined the level of deception and criminal activity they were describing. He was particularly shocked to learn that Victoria had been sharing details about his business and his clients with Marcus. Some of Robert's architectural clients were personal friends, and the idea that Victoria had been planning to defraud them felt like a betrayal beyond simple adultery. But Robert's anger quickly turned to fear when Detective Rodriguez showed him evidence of Marcus's history of violence and the threatening text messages between Marcus and Victoria. Robert realized that his plan to simply confront Victoria about her affair could put his entire family in danger. Detective Rodriguez asked Robert to cooperate with a controlled operation. Instead of confronting Victoria immediately, Robert would continue acting normal while law enforcement gathered additional evidence. They would monitor Victoria and Marcus's communications, document their criminal activities, and build a case strong enough to ensure both would face significant prison time. Robert agreed to cooperate, but he had one condition: he wanted to protect his children from any knowledge of what was happening until the investigation was complete. Detective Rodriguez agreed to this, and they developed a plan to conduct the investigation discreetly while maintaining Robert's normal family routine. Over the next 2 weeks, Robert wore recording devices during conversations with Victoria, hoping to capture admissions about her criminal activities. He also gave Detective Rodriguez access to his business accounts and communications, so they could monitor any attempts by Victoria to access client funds. The investigation revealed that Victoria and Marcus's scheme was even more sophisticated than initially suspected. They had been targeting not just Robert's personal wealth, but his entire architectural firm. Victoria had been gradually gathering information about Robert's business partners, his largest clients, and upcoming projects that involved significant financial transactions. Detective Rodriguez discovered that Victoria had been photographing documents from Robert's home office, including contracts, client lists, and financial projections. She had also been secretly recording Robert's phone conversations with business partners, gathering information about project budgets and payment schedules. But the most disturbing discovery was evidence that Victoria and Marcus had been planning to frame Robert for their own crimes. Phone records showed that Marcus had been researching how to make financial transactions appear as though they were authorized by Robert personally. Victoria had been setting up the groundwork to claim that any missing money was the result of Robert's gambling addiction or secret business investments. Detective Rodriguez realized that Victoria and Marcus weren't just planning to steal from Robert Tolles, they were planning to destroy his reputation and potentially send him to prison for their crimes. This level of calculated cruelty went far beyond typical financial fraud. But as the investigation progressed, Detective Rodriguez began to notice something troubling in the dynamic between Victoria and Marcus. While Marcus appeared to be the more aggressive partner, pushing for faster action and making threats, Victoria was demonstrating a level of strategic thinking and emotional manipulation that suggested she might be more than just Marcus's equal partner. In recorded conversations between Victoria and Robert, Detective Rodriguez observed Victoria expertly manipulating her husband's emotions, extracting information about his business, while simultaneously making him feel guilty for suspecting her of wrongdoing. Victoria's ability to lie convincingly while appearing emotionally vulnerable was so sophisticated that it impressed even experienced investigators. More concerning was evidence that Victoria had been manipulating Marcus as well. Phone records showed that Victoria had been in contact with other men besides Marcus, and she appeared to be running similar schemes with multiple partners simultaneously. Detective Rodriguez began to suspect that Marcus might not be the mastermind of this operation, but rather another one of Victoria's victims who had been manipulated into becoming her partner in crime. This suspicion was reinforced when surveillance revealed that Victoria had been secretly meeting with a fourth man, someone she hadn't told Marcus about. Detective Rodriguez's investigation into this mystery man revealed that he was David Kim, a financial advisor who worked with several of Robert's architectural clients. Victoria appeared to be gathering information from David about Robert's clients' financial situations, information that would be valuable for planning future fraudulent schemes. But what Detective Rodriguez discovered next would change her understanding of this entire case. David Kim wasn't just another target of Victoria's manipulations, he was her original partner, and Marcus was actually a relatively recent addition to an operation that had been running much longer than anyone suspected. The investigation was about to reveal that Victoria Chen wasn't just a cheating wife who had gotten involved with a dangerous man. She was a sophisticated criminal who had been operating an elaborate fraud scheme for years, manipulating multiple men including her own husband, and she was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. But before Detective Rodriguez could fully unravel the extent of Victoria's criminal network, the situation exploded into violence that would leave Robert fighting for his life and reveal the shocking truth about who had been the real mastermind all along. By early November 2023, Detective Rodriguez's investigation had revealed that Victoria Chen was operating a criminal enterprise far more complex and dangerous than a simple adultery case. But the detective was about to learn that Victoria's ability to manipulate and deceive was even more deadly than she had suspected. The crisis began when Marcus Williams started to suspect that Victoria was deceiving him about the timeline for accessing Robert's money. Marcus had been pressuring Victoria to move faster, but Victoria kept insisting that she needed more time to properly manipulate Robert into giving her access to his business accounts. What Marcus didn't know was that Victoria had never intended to share Robert's money with him equally. Phone records recovered later would show that Victoria had been planning to eliminate Marcus from their partnership once she had successfully defrauded Robert. She had been secretly gathering evidence of Marcus's other crimes, apparently planning to turn him into police once she no longer needed him. But Marcus was also planning to betray Victoria. Detective Rodriguez's surveillance revealed that Marcus had been meeting with David Kim, Victoria's original partner, apparently trying to form an alliance against Victoria. Marcus had become suspicious of Victoria's loyalty and was worried that she was planning to double-cross him. The situation reached a breaking point when Robert, acting under Detective Rodriguez's guidance, told Victoria that he was planning to restructure his business finances and would need to review all their joint accounts and investments. This was part of the police plan to gather evidence about Victoria's financial crimes, but Victoria interpreted Robert's announcement as a sign that her husband was becoming suspicious of her activities. That evening, Victoria called Marcus in a panic, saying that they needed to accelerate their timeline immediately. Phone records show that Victoria told Marcus they had to access Robert's accounts within the next few days. Before Robert could discover their activities and potentially contact law enforcement, Marcus responded that he was tired of Victoria's delays and excuses and that he was going to handle the situation his own way. When Victoria tried to talk him out of taking any drastic action, Marcus became threatening, telling Victoria that she had involved him in this scheme, and now she was going to see it through to the end, regardless of her concerns. What happened next revealed the true depth of Victoria's criminal thinking. Instead of trying to protect her husband from Marcus's threats, Victoria saw an opportunity to eliminate both men from her life while keeping all the money she had stolen over the past 2 years. Victoria called Robert and told him that she had something important to confess, something that couldn't wait any longer. She asked him to meet her at a restaurant outside of town, claiming that she needed to tell him the truth about her recent behavior in a private setting where their children wouldn't overhear their conversation. Robert, who was still wearing a recording device as part of Detective Rodriguez's investigation, agreed to meet Victoria. He believed that his wife was finally ready to confess to her affair, and that this meeting might be the beginning of saving their marriage. But Victoria had also called Marcus, telling him that Robert had discovered their scheme and was planning to turn them both in to police. She told Marcus that Robert had threatened to ruin both of their lives unless they could convince him to stay quiet. Victoria suggested that Marcus should come to the restaurant to help her persuade Robert not to contact law enforcement. Detective Rodriguez, who was monitoring both Victoria and Robert's communications, realized that Victoria was setting up a dangerous confrontation between Robert and Marcus. The detective immediately dispatched surveillance teams to the restaurant, but she was about to discover that Victoria's plan was even more deadly than she had suspected. Victoria arrived at the restaurant first and chose a table in the back corner, away from other customers and security cameras. When Robert arrived, he was surprised to see that Victoria seemed calm and almost cheerful, not like someone who was about to confess to an affair. Victoria told Robert that she had been thinking about their marriage and had realized how much she loved him and their children. She said she wanted to make a fresh start and had some ideas about how they could invest their money more effectively to secure their family's future. Victoria even suggested that they should take a second honeymoon to rekindle their romance. Robert was confused by Victoria's positive attitude, especially since he was expecting her to confess to her infidelity. But before he could ask Victoria what she really wanted to discuss, Marcus Williams walked into the restaurant and approached their table. Victoria introduced Marcus to Robert as a business associate who had some investment opportunities that might interest them. She suggested that the three of them should discuss these opportunities together, since they involved significant amounts of money that would require Robert's approval. But Marcus's behavior immediately made Robert suspicious. Marcus seemed agitated and kept checking his phone. And when Robert asked questions about the supposed investment opportunities, Marcus gave vague, inconsistent answers that didn't make sense. What Robert didn't know was that Victoria had told Marcus a completely different story about why they were all meeting. Victoria had convinced Marcus that Robert was aware of their affair and their criminal activities, and that Robert was planning to expose them unless they could convince him to take part in one final large-scale fraud that would make all of them wealthy enough to disappear. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Robert started asking specific questions about Marcus's background and the supposed investment opportunities. Marcus became increasingly agitated, apparently believing that Robert was testing him or trying to gather evidence for law enforcement. When Robert excused himself to use the restroom, Marcus confronted Victoria angrily, accusing her of setting him up and demanding to know what game she was playing. Victoria tried to calm Marcus down, but he had realized that Victoria had been lying to him about Robert's knowledge of their activities. Marcus told Victoria that he was done with her schemes and manipulations and that he was going to tell Robert the truth about everything: Buckus, the affairs, the financial fraud, and Victoria's plan to steal money from Robert's business clients. Marcus apparently believed that by confessing everything to Robert, he could somehow minimize his own legal consequences and shift the blame entirely onto Victoria. When Robert returned from the restroom, he found Marcus and Victoria engaged in a heated argument that other restaurant customers were starting to notice. Victoria was trying to convince Marcus to leave quietly, while Marcus was insisting that he needed to have an honest conversation with Robert immediately. What happened next would be reconstructed later from witness testimony, security camera footage from the restaurant's parking lot, and Robert's own recorded testimony from his hospital bed. Marcus told Robert that Victoria had been having an affair with him for over a year, and that she had been using information about Robert's business to defraud other men. Marcus claimed that Victoria had manipulated him into participating in these crimes, and that she was planning to steal money from Robert's architectural clients. Robert's reaction was initially shock, then anger directed at both Victoria and Marcus. But Victoria's response revealed the true depth of her manipulative abilities. Instead of confessing or apologizing, Victoria accused Marcus of lying and claimed that Marcus had been stalking and threatening her for months. Victoria told Robert that Marcus was a dangerous man who had been trying to blackmail her by threatening to make up stories about an affair, unless she helped him gain access to Robert's business accounts. She begged Robert to protect her from Marcus's threats and suggested that they should leave the restaurant immediately and call police. Marcus became enraged by Victoria's lies and started shouting at her, calling her a liar and a manipulator. Other restaurant customers became alarmed by the confrontation, and the restaurant manager approached their table to ask them to leave. The three of them moved toward the restaurant's exit, but the argument continued in the parking lot. Robert, who was recording everything for Detective Rodriguez's investigation, tried to get clear answers from both Victoria and Marcus about what was really happening. But Victoria had one final manipulation planned, one that would nearly cost Robert his life and reveal her as the true mastermind behind everything that had happened. What happened in that restaurant parking lot on November 15, 2023, would expose Victoria Chen as one of the most calculating criminals Detective Rodriguez had ever encountered. But the truth about Victoria's real plan wouldn't be fully understood until months later, during her trial testimony. According to Robert's recorded testimony and witness statements, The argument between Victoria and Marcus escalated quickly once they reached the parking lot. Marcus was demanding that Victoria tell Robert the truth about their criminal partnership, while Victoria continued to claim that Marcus was a dangerous stalker who had been threatening her family. Robert, confused and overwhelmed by the conflicting stories, tried to separate Victoria and Marcus physically. He told Marcus to leave and said that he would handle the situation with Victoria privately. But Marcus refused to leave, insisting that Robert needed to understand how dangerous Victoria really was. That's when Victoria made a move that shocked everyone, including Marcus. She suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm and started screaming for help, claiming that Marcus was trying to attack her when several restaurant customers came outside to see what was happening. Victoria told them that Marcus had threatened to kill her and her family. Marcus was stunned by Victoria's performance and tried to explain to the witnesses that Victoria was lying, but his agitated behavior made him appear unstable and dangerous. The situation became even more confusing when Victoria claimed that Marcus had a weapon, causing several witnesses to call 911. Robert tried to calm the situation by asking everyone to step back while they sorted out the truth. But Victoria had orchestrated a scenario that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. When police sirens became audible in the distance, Marcus panicked and ran to his car. But Victoria wasn't finished with her manipulation. As Marcus was getting into his car, Victoria ran toward him, still screaming that he was trying to hurt her. Robert, believing that his wife was in danger, followed Victoria toward Marcus's car. What happened next would be reconstructed later from multiple witness accounts and security camera footage. As Robert approached Marcus's car to protect Victoria, Marcus apparently believed that Robert and Victoria were working together to frame him for assault. Marcus got out of his car and confronted Robert directly, demanding to know if Robert had been part of Victoria's plan all along. Robert, still believing that Victoria was the victim in this situation, told Marcus to stay away from his wife. But Marcus, now convinced that Robert and Victoria were both lying to him, became increasingly aggressive. The situation escalated when Marcus shoved Robert, causing Robert to fall backward and hit his head on the concrete parking lot. Robert was knocked unconscious immediately, and witnesses reported that he was bleeding heavily from a head wound. Victoria's reaction to her husband's injury revealed a shocking truth about her real intentions. Instead of rushing to help Robert or showing concern for his injury, Victoria calmly walked over to Marcus and said something that several witnesses heard clearly. "That worked out better than I expected. Now we just need to make sure he doesn't remember what really happened here." Marcus stared at Victoria in shock, apparently realizing for the first time that Victoria had orchestrated the entire confrontation. Witnesses reported that Marcus asked Victoria if she had planned for Robert to get hurt, and Victoria responded by saying that Robert's injury had solved several problems for both of them. But Marcus's conscience apparently couldn't handle the realization that he had been manipulated into seriously injuring an innocent man. Instead of fleeing the scene as Victoria apparently expected, Marcus knelt down next to Robert and started trying to help with his injuries. Marcus told witnesses to call for an ambulance and began applying pressure to Robert's head wound. When police and paramedics arrived, they found a confusing scene. Robert was unconscious with a serious head injury. Marcus was trying to provide first aid while covered in Robert's blood, and Victoria was standing several feet away, calmly talking on her phone. Victoria immediately told the responding officers that Marcus had attacked both her and her husband without provocation. She claimed that Marcus was an unstable man who had been stalking her for months and had finally snapped when she refused his advances. Marcus tried to explain to police that Victoria was lying and that the situation was much more complicated than Victoria was claiming. But Marcus was covered in Robert's blood. Multiple witnesses had heard him arguing with Victoria, and his history of violence made his claims of innocence seem unlikely. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the scene within minutes of the emergency call, but even she was initially confused by what had happened. The confrontation had occurred so quickly and chaotically that witnesses gave conflicting accounts of who had done what. What was clear was that Robert Chen was critically injured and needed immediate medical attention. Robert was rushed to Metropolitan General Hospital with a severe traumatic brain injury. Doctors initially weren't sure if he would survive, and even if he did, they warned that he might have permanent brain damage that could affect his memory, his ability to speak, or his motor functions. Marcus Williams was arrested at the scene and charged with aggravated assault. Based on witness testimony and Victoria's statement, police initially believed that Marcus had attacked Robert without provocation, possibly as part of a love triangle gone wrong. But Detective Rodriguez knew there was much more to this story than a simple assault case. She immediately began reviewing the audio recordings from Robert's wire, hoping to understand what had really happened in that parking lot. What she discovered on those recordings would eventually send Victoria Chen to prison for decades and reveal her as one of the most manipulative criminals in the department's history. The recordings captured Victoria's entire performance in the restaurant and parking lot, including her contradictory statements to Marcus and Robert, her fake claims about being stalked, and most damning of all, her calm reaction to Robert's injury and her statement about the situation working out better than she had expected. But Detective Rodriguez also discovered something else on the recordings that would prove Victoria's guilt beyond any doubt. In the chaos of the parking lot confrontation, Victoria apparently forgot that Robert was still wearing his recording device. The audio captured Victoria making a phone call while Robert was lying unconscious and bleeding. Victoria had called David Kim, her original criminal partner, and said, "Phase 1 is complete. Robert is out of the picture, and Marcus is going to take the blame for everything. You can start accessing the accounts tomorrow morning. By the time Robert wakes up, if he wakes up, we'll have everything we need." This phone call proved that Victoria had planned the entire confrontation as a way to eliminate both Robert and Marcus from her criminal enterprise, while making it appear that Marcus was solely responsible for the violence. Victoria had manipulated Marcus into believing that Robert was a threat to their operation, knowing that Marcus's violent history would make him likely to react aggressively. Detective Rodriguez realized that Victoria had never intended for Robert to be seriously injured. She had expected Marcus to threaten or intimidate Robert, not to actually hurt him. But when Robert's injury turned out to be more severe than Victoria had planned, she immediately adapted her scheme to take advantage of the situation. Within hours of Robert's hospitalization, Victoria had begun accessing Robert's business accounts and transferring money to accounts controlled by David Kim. She had also contacted Robert's business partners, claiming that Robert had been attacked by a deranged client and that she needed to manage his business affairs while he recovered. But Victoria's plan began to unravel when Detective Rodriguez confronted her with the evidence from Robert's recording device. When Victoria realized that her phone call to David Kim had been recorded, she initially claimed that the recording was fake or taken out of context. However, Detective Rodriguez had been building a case against Victoria for months, and she had evidence that went far beyond the parking lot confrontation. Phone records, financial documents, and surveillance footage all painted a picture of Victoria as a sophisticated criminal who had been manipulating multiple men for years. The investigation revealed that Victoria's criminal activities had started long before she met Marcus Williams. She had been running romance scams and financial frauds for at least 3 years, targeting wealthy men through dating apps, social media, and her real estate business contacts. Victoria's method was always the same. Number she would identify men who were wealthy but emotionally vulnerable, often due to unhappy marriages, recent divorces, or family problems. She would then create elaborate personas designed to appeal to each victim's specific vulnerabilities and desires. With some victims, Victoria presented herself as a successful businesswoman looking for investment partners. With others, she played the role of a lonely housewife seeking emotional connection. With still others, she portrayed herself as a sophisticated woman interested in casual, discreet relationships. But what made Victoria particularly dangerous was her ability to maintain multiple false identities simultaneously while appearing to live a normal family life with Robert and their children. She had compartmentalized her criminal activities so effectively that even Robert, who lived with her every day, had no idea of the scope of her deception. Detective Rodriguez's investigation ultimately identified 12 different men who had been victimized by Victoria's schemes over 3 years. The total amount of money Victoria had stolen was over $800,000, money that she had hidden in accounts across multiple states and even in offshore banking systems. But the most shocking revelation came when Detective Rodriguez interviewed David Kim, Victoria's original partner, who had been arrested based on the recorded phone call. David revealed that Victoria had been planning to eliminate him from their partnership as well, just as she had planned to eliminate Marcus. David told investigators that Victoria had been gathering evidence of his involvement in their criminal activities, apparently planning to turn him into police once she had successfully stolen Robert's money and disappeared. Victoria had been playing all of her criminal partners against each other, manipulating each one into believing that the others were planning to betray them. The investigation revealed that Victoria Chen was not just a cheating wife or even a typical financial fraudster. She was a predatory criminal who had been systematically destroying the lives of everyone around her while maintaining a facade of respectability and normalcy. But Victoria had made one critical error in her calculations. She had underestimated Detective Rodriguez's thoroughness and Robert's courage. Even while fighting for his life in a hospital bed, Robert had insisted on cooperating with the investigation and testifying against his wife. Robert Chen survived his injuries, but his recovery took months of intensive rehabilitation. The traumatic brain injury affected his short-term memory and his ability to concentrate, forcing him to temporarily close his architectural practice. However, Robert's doctors were amazed by his determination to recover, particularly his insistence on being able to testify clearly during Victoria's trial. The trial of Victoria Chen lasted 6 weeks and became one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the city's history. Victoria was charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, assault, and attempted murder. The prosecution argued that Victoria had orchestrated the parking lot confrontation with the intention of having Marcus seriously harm or kill Robert, eliminating her husband while making Marcus the sole suspect. Victoria's defense team argued that she was also a victim of Marcus Williams' manipulation, and that her criminal activities were the result of emotional abuse and financial coercion. They claimed that Victoria had been forced to participate in the fraud schemes against her will, and that the parking lot confrontation was Marcus's idea, not hers. But the evidence against Victoria was overwhelming. The recorded phone calls, financial documents, and testimony from multiple victims painted a clear picture of Victoria as the mastermind behind an elaborate criminal enterprise. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours before finding Victoria guilty on all charges. Victoria Chen was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. Marcus Williams pleaded guilty to assault charges and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. David Kim cooperated with investigators and received a reduced sentence of 5 years in prison in exchange for his testimony against Victoria. The case had a profound impact on everyone involved. Robert Chen eventually rebuilt his architectural practice, but he struggled with trust issues and the emotional trauma of discovering that his wife had been planning his destruction for years. He and his children moved to another state to start fresh, and Robert has since become an advocate for victims of financial fraud and domestic manipulation. Detective Rodriguez used the Victoria Chen case to develop new investigative techniques for complex financial fraud cases involving multiple victims and sophisticated deception schemes. She has since worked on similar cases across the country and has become a recognized expert in criminal manipulation and romance scams. The 12 men who were victimized by Victoria's schemes formed a support group to help each other recover from the financial and emotional damage they had suffered. Several of them have become advocates for raising awareness about sophisticated fraud schemes that target vulnerable individuals. But perhaps the most important lesson from Victoria Chen's case is how someone can live a completely double life while maintaining a convincing facade of normalcy and respectability. Victoria's neighbors, friends, and even her own children had no idea that she was capable of the level of deception and manipulation that the investigation revealed. The case also highlighted how sophisticated criminals can exploit the trust and vulnerability of their victims, using emotional manipulation and romantic relationships as weapons to commit financial crimes. Victoria's ability to compartmentalize her criminal activities while maintaining her role as a wife and mother shows how dangerous predators can hide in plain sight. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult but important investigation. Cases like Victoria Chen's remind us that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous, and that the warning signs of manipulation and deception are often subtle and easy to miss until it's too late. Your support for this channel helps me continue investigating cases that need to be told, cases that can help protect others from becoming victims of similar crimes. The discussions and insights you share in the comments section often provide valuable perspectives that help other viewers recognize dangerous situations in their own lives. I want to ask you to think about this case and share your thoughts in the comments below. What warning signs do you think Robert should have recognized earlier? How could Victoria's manipulation have been detected sooner? Your insights might help someone else who is facing a similar situation. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the sophisticated methods that predators use to manipulate their victims, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future cases. I'm currently working on an investigation that involves a missing person case that stumped investigators for 20 years, until a single anonymous phone call revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local government. Next week's case will show you how sometimes the most innocent-seeming people can be hiding the darkest secrets, and how one family's search for answers uncovered corruption that changed an entire community forever. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you're alerted as soon as that investigation is released. Until then, stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember that the truth is often more complex and more dangerous than it first appears. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next investigation.